Okay, I'm Nayana Currimbhoy, and I'm moderating this panel with these two lovely ladies, and the panel is called Skin Deep. It's about race, history, and memory. I mean, that's a huge subject. We are not going to sort of sink under this weight. We're going to keep it light. We're talking about makeup and melatonin. So we have Margo Jefferson, Pulitzer Prize winner for criticism. She's written theater reviews, book reviews for the New York Times. She teaches writing at Columbia University. And her most recent work, Negroland, is about pre-civil memoir of growing up in mid-century America in Chicago as one of the privileged few of the Black community. And the New York Times review said the author is excellent at tonal range, which was a good word to use, tonal range, I thought, of Caucasian privilege. Then we have Mira Jacob, whose debut novel, Sleepwalker's Guide to the Dancing, brings to life an Indian family transplanted to America from the Southwest in 1980s. It has received great reviews, and it has been chosen as the best book I'm certainly not, I'm losing where I wrote where.
That's just say everybody.
Yeah, we'll continue to exactly. So, and actually when we met, we all realized we lived in New York City, and when we met in New York, we realized that they both have one person who actually, I think you can say, personifies the changing, the fluidity of race, and that's Michael Jackson. Because Margo had written a book about Michael Jackson, and Mira had recently posted a BuzzFeed graphic article about 37 questions to ask.
It was, so it was 37 difficult questions from my mixed race son who is here. We're going to hold in the Michael Jackson news. My son's obsessed with Michael Jackson, so part of this was
and he knows what questions to ask.
And he knows what questions to ask, yeah, but part of this was, and it was about skin color, because my husband is white, and I'm obviously not, and so he asked me, Mommy, is Michael Jackson brown or is he white? So I said, oh, it's a really good question. He actually started brown and he kind of turned white. And he goes, he turned white? And I said, yeah. And he goes, are you going to turn white? And I was like, no, I'm not going to. He goes, am I? And I was like, no, you're not going to turn white. He goes, Daddy? I said, Daddy's already white. He goes, but was he always? I realized it was going to be really hard to talk about race after that.
And we have Margo, who's...
And if you think about it, all of those questions were, during Michael Jackson's life and evolution, being asked, but screamed, debated, furiously declaimed, denounced. All those questions. Am I going to? Did he? Why did he? What does it represent for me and my people that he did? How is this possible? Etc., etc. What does it mean? But all in this manic, driven way that lacked freshness. Yes.
There's one way. Race is about, okay, a Caucasian privilege, it's us and them on one hand. We may be brown and black and they're white, and so how we want them to perceive us or how they perceive us. And then there's the other, how we perceive ourselves, how we parse our own skin colors.
Yeah.
And that actually, Margo in her book has written about relatives who then, her uncle,
great uncle, yeah.
Right, who lived as a white person and then turned Negro, you say.
He became a Negro when
he became
his job, and in these days, I use the word Negro in a very historically specific way. It was the term of choice for much of the early 20th century, and it was even capitalized in 1947. But Uncle Lucius, great Uncle Lucius, passed for white. He crossed over into the white world as a young man, and when he retired from his job, which required him to be white, he retired back into back to black, into a black neighborhood and a black identity, and suddenly we met him. And I looked at him. I was quite used to, and this is something that's part of all our worlds, to Negroes, to black people who literally ranged in appearance from Nordic to Sub-Saharan. But perception when you know someone belongs to your group changes. When I looked at Uncle Lucius, I kept thinking, he's my cousin, but I'm looking at a white man, and it was absolutely stupefying to me. So mysterious.
And how did your family or everybody treat, did they welcome him back into the fold, as it were? Or?
They basically did. In those days, passing was looked upon both as a kind of wonderful joke. Ralph Ellison has a good line called, change the joke and slip the yoke. And to pass was in a way to say, oh, guess you white people thought you knew what being white was. Hello. None of what you assumed is true in any way. It was also useful economically, socially. So there was that sense of, all right, this is a move, this is a strategy, this is a choice that racism, American ideologies imposed. We will not betray that. But two things, two little ironies. One, Uncle Lucius, clearly, a little made hypersensitive and touchy by those years. Uncle Lucius began to call all his black relatives and accuse them of not paying attention to him, which is an interesting psychological.
After he retired?
Yes, yes. You're not paying me enough attention, and I remember someone saying, well, this is a little bit of transference. Uncle Lucius was paying us no attention all these years. Also, my parents, and I think this was a little bit of revenge, as well as their own snobbery. The feeling was, if you were going to pass, you needed to achieve a status, achieve in ways that you could not as a Negro. And Uncle Lucius had been a traveling salesman. So, they said, well, for heaven's sake, we're doctors and lawyers.
How dare you cross over?
Exactly. Revenge is a dish best eaten cold many years later. But yeah, all our worlds are filled with these kinds of little contradictions and parsings and
also this whole the two facets to your book in a way is one is how we are perceived by the outsiders. I think I said that, and Mira in her books writes about sort of the diaspora and how when you are one of the few families in a spot, how you have to kind of not show a weak spot, and I think you say the same thing too. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that, so my book is called The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, and one of the things that travels in this family is a series of sleeping disorders. So they're narcoleptic and they're insomniacs, and they're having this kind of problem that's showing up in their subconscious. And it was funny because when I was first talking to someone about the book, an editor said to me, what are all these sleeping disorders? I'm not sure that it would be realistic. And I said, but for me it makes a lot of sense, because when my family came to America, first of all, I was born here, but my parents came to New Mexico in like 1968, and we were one of, I think, 3 families there at the time. And growing up there, I remember being very conscious of trying to fit in a specific way. But part of that was just modeling the people around me. And you do it, you leave your house and how you are with your parents, and then you see how the Americans stand. Like, I remember understanding at some point that Americans, like the kids on the soccer field, did a lot of this. Kind of doing that, right? It was just like, whatever that meant to me. But what that meant to me too is that at night, and I was imagining this family, it's like you hold your body in a certain way to pass all day. And then at night, your subconscious takes over, and you kind of can't live with all the changes that you're making, or they have their way with you a little bit. So
yes.
I think Margo has a perfect underlay to that. Yeah.
No, I'm just so taken that it makes absolute metaphoric and psychological sense. Totally, yeah. Because they're always at least two selves, and you're so right about the gesture, because you can't really change your appearance.
Right.
So it has to be the wardrobe, the gestures, the intonations, the voice.
The smells. Like, one of the things that we talk about, and I talk about this with a lot of my South Asian friends, is we all, especially at the time when I was growing up, nobody wanted curry, nobody wanted anything that, and it was like, and there was this idea, and people would say it like someone else in my class, they would say, she really smells. And they would look at me in this way where I thought, oh no. And so I would when my mother, when she would be making food, I would take clothes from the dryer sometimes and stick them right into bags and put them on at school, which is so, so terrifying to say that now, and it's also so strange, right? In a way, it's
but
like.
Did you share that? Did you tell her you just did that?
No, I would never tell her that. Mom, I'm horribly embarrassed by this delicious food you're making. I don't know how to rectify it with the outside world. Like, I don't know words for that.
I mean, it's so shameful.
Yeah.
You know, so guilt-producing.
Yeah, and it's also something that she's making out of love for us that's frankly delicious, and I'm somehow having to hide it, and I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what to say about, like, I have to sort of hide this love in this way so that I can appear like other people. That's a really strange thing to go into the world with.
It is. You know, I remember once sitting in, would have been around 2nd grade, and I suddenly became fixated on the fact that I was wearing a pale blue sock, and that the girls around me seemed all to be wearing white socks. Then I looked around, but they weren't all. And I realized in later years that the blue sock, and I really could not stop thinking about it, and I got a little angry at my mother, really was, again, a stand-in metonym for I was brown and most of the people around me. I was colored, which was also the word, the word that preceded Negro. I was colored, and they were white, and the sock embodied it.
Yeah.
And you said earlier that you can't change your appearance, so you have to change your stance. But the thing is that I think that people try very hard. I mean, Michael Jackson withstanding, but even just little things like in your book, you have this thing of fair and lovely. This cream that in India people put when they're too brown.
Yes,
because even within India, there's of course white is more.
Well, that's always very shocking for Americans,
yes,
right?
but
It's always
so
very shocking
true.
for white Americans to realize that in India, my skin color is just a tragedy in my family, and it's so funny because I always think it's going to change. And this last time when I was back, an aunt said to me, because she was looking at the photograph of me on the book, and then she was looking at me, and she was looking at the photograph, she said, "But what happened to you?" I was like, "I don't know." She goes, "Your skin." I was like, "What happened to my skin?" She goes, "You're in the sun too long, or something, or they lightened you for the picture." And I was like, "No, it's the same. I'm the same. Nobody lightened me." And then I got a little. Then I was stewing on that rage for half an hour in a conversation, and then she says, and then I finally said, "By the way, my American husband has no problems with my color." And she said, "Oh, that's right, the Americans, they'll settle for anything, isn't it?"
Yes. No, and that kind of ruthlessness is very much a part of these communities. The color coding, the powder. You certainly can try to change your appearance, lighten powder, or making, even coloring in. If your lips were considered too full, one of the tricks was you color in the line a little less so that everyone can't see
how big your
exactly.
Or your hair.
Yes. Oh well, the straightening and the yes. Though I told Mira when I met her, I was so interested. I said, well, in my world, combine your skin color, which is not dark brown, with your hair and your features, and many black people would have wanted to look exactly like you.
Someone go tell my aunt.
Exactly. I don't think it will make her happy. Or like you, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. But and then we come to language for you. As you said that your mother suddenly one day decided that you did not know the history. She heard you guys.
This was so tricky. My parents both spoke standardized English, which this was important. This was the mark that you were a successful, assimilated, respectable member of the Negro elite. My grandmother apparently had a Southern accent, and she had not a trace of it, not a bit. But the price for this was heavy. One day, in these days, all you saw on television were movies with people like Mantan Moreland or Stephen Fetcher, just absolutely clownish. People who spoke in a violent, a violent, insulting mockery of what later came to be called Black vernacular, Black English. So Mother came home one day, and Denise and I had a Langston Hughes poem that was written in Black vernacular. It started, "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair." And all our little pristine, white books, we were reading this poem aloud, laughing hysterically, the way, like an Amos and Andy thing. We were going, "Oh, Wilson, I tell you, the life for me ain't been no crystal." We thought it was just hilarious, and it's so shameful for me to even use that voice, but I had to give you a sense. And my mother walked in, and she said, she suddenly realized, oh my God, the price of education in one way is absolute ignorance and miseducation in another. And she said, well, she managed to give a little talk about how we didn't understand Black history and Negro history, and in her days we would sing the Negro National Anthem, but with her perfectly standardized English, she then said, let me read you this poem the way it should. And she shifted into, a beautifully cadenced Black vernacular that suddenly made it, the language Hughes had intended. She was very angry. And after that, we began to get more strict, clearly compensatory lessons in Negro history and achievement, because she realized that was the price of integration that was going to be neglected.
Can I ask, what was your reaction in that moment when she was angry and you were what did you feel?
Mortified.
Yeah.
I was so ashamed. I felt stupid also, which I didn't like to make mistakes, and so much of my upbringing was mistakes are very costly for the entire race.
Yeah, it's not just you.
Right? It's not just you.
Race.
And you must know this very well. So I was ashamed and mortified, and she was angry, and I was always scared. I thought, my God, what other kinds of mistakes lie ahead for me here? Yes.
There are so many potentials.
There are so many.
It's a minefield. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the minefield you felt when you came in as a young, besides Stan's.
Yeah, I guess, I think for me, because we were such a cultural oddity, I think it was less because you're talking about a history of oppression. And that is a very, very different minefield than what I was stepping into, which was just the not knowing, right? We were just an oddity, we were a cultural oddity. And the strange things, and every once in a while, there would be some terrible thing, like on Raiders of the Lost Ark, it was like the Indians eating the monkey brains, and all of a sudden everyone would look at you, and you'd be like, but that's not, and it wasn't even Indians, it was anyone vaguely like me doing anything strange, or for example, when I understood that most of America was going to first understand India through Apu in The Simpsons, right? So really, that's Apu in The Simpsons was how most of my generation first started seeing an Indian in mainstream culture. It was a cartoon, right?
Yes.
A cartoon Indian that ran a Quickie Mart, and just knowing that was going to be their first cultural reference was crazy. Right? It's a crazy thing to be like, oh, that's what you're gonna interact with.
Were you angry? Were you ashamed? Were you sure?
I think what I felt all the time is, and it's not totally different today. And I talked about this. I gave a speech this week about race, and we can get back to this, to the publishing industry. But part of it was we were so hungry to see ourselves anywhere. Actually, what I always remember is. The movie, there was water and fire and Earth. Yes, thank you. When those movies came out, I remember going to those movies in New Mexico at the Guild, at the one arts theater there, and it was packed with every Indian in Albuquerque and their babies, and they're like 10-year-olds, and they're 14-year-olds, and these movies were not actually great for 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds. These were intense movies about adult situations, but we were so dying to see ourselves anywhere, and I could tell this person with this 4-year-old was just saying, like, look, here you are, this is you in this world where there is no you, this is you, and the pain of that is so intense to realize that what we're giving them for a cultural reference will have there's no context for this as kids to understand that, but what you're trying to say is there are people that look like you in the world, And what a strange thing to go out with, right? What a fraught situation.
Yeah. And they're not doing these very simplified, comedic things.
Right.
You know, and this 4-year-old child may absorb texture and mood as well as looks.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so to come back to Mira's recent talk,
Yes,
which has drawn
Yeah.
some fire.
Yes. So I'll give you guys the background a little bit. I was asked to give a speech for Publishers Weekly. They had a celebration earlier this week for the young publishing industry stars. And they asked me to do the keynote a few weeks ago, and I was really thrilled because the numbers for people of color in publishing are just so staggeringly sad when you look at them, and how hard it is for us to get reviews, and also what we go through in that moment. But those numbers are also kind of useless in a way, because people look at that and like, oh, that's sad, there's 6 of you. But they don't actually know what that means, so I wanted to put a context to that. And part of that was talking about the things that I've faced coming out with this book, which I should tell you was shepherded by a wonderful house with thoughtful editors, with people really, really behind it. So I know that I got a great shake of things. And yet, when it came out, a lot of the times when I was asked to talk about it, I was asked to whitewash our story. And what they would always say is, make it relatable. And I'll give you an example of this, which is the example I used in the speech, was this, that a Boston Public Radio producer asked me to read a portion of my story on air. And so I gave him the excerpt, and he said, I'm going to make edits, because I have to. And I said, great, make edits. And then he gave it back to me, and half of it was he just cut it, and that was fine. But then he also said, you know, you have 3 unusual names in here. You have 3 characters in here. They all have very unusual names. If you're going to stick with the unusual names, which I also thought, well, that's crazy. That I don't know how I would not stick with it, considering I wrote a whole book. But if I should suddenly, yes, let me change them to Bob and Karen immediately. If you're going to stick with the unusual names, can you cut the characters back to 2 in the scene for something that's already published? And then he went further, and it said, and he'd asked me to write an intro, and I said 3 East Indian teenagers sit on a roof talking, and he had crossed out East Indian and written Asian Indian.
Asian Indian.
I don't know.
It's
honestly, and when I saw it, I thought, what is that? And in my head, I was like, no one has ever said Asian Indian unless it was in the following sentence, which is, no, not like American Indian, like Asian Indian. Right?
Yes.
I was like, it doesn't even exist, that thing. So I crossed it out and wrote East Indian again. And then he wrote me another note. He said, alas, East Indian is just not a term we use here in America. I'm so sorry to tell you. It's just not something we use here, and we don't. And he was basically saying, like, we don't want to confuse anybody here in America. And so I had to write back, alas, I am American. And in the many decades that I have lived here, we have always called ourselves East Indian. And it was just one of those things that I was using as an example to say, anyway, so that's the speech. That was what the part of the speech was about, attacking that. But then there's the meta level of this, which is that when I gave the speech, I was giving it in a crowded bar, and I will say the sound system was horrific. And when I understood that it was horrific, I took a chair and I stood up on it, and I started yelling the speech out, because I was like, I'm gonna get you people, we're gonna do this. I wrote this speech, we're doing this. And they had asked me to speak for 12 minutes, and I was speaking for like 8, so I was like, I got this. And then as I was speaking, partially due to the sound system, but also part of it was just people just turned away as I was giving it.
Mira,
and then,
what did you say?
I mean, the first I said, please, you guys, I wrote you this speech, I really want you to hear it, please. And then when I realized it wasn't going to go that way, then I was like, I'm just barreling through, and I basically shouted the speech through the end. And the crazy thing is that there was a small ring of people that were really determined to hear it. And I know that because they really packed up right near me. But the minute it was over, I just felt awful. And I got down and I was sort of shaky, and I knew that I wasn't doing very well emotionally. And so I just made a beeline for the door, but the worst part about it was walking out and seeing all the people of color who were coming left and right to grab me, they were just like, thank you, that was awful, thank you. Which is such a crazy thing to have happen. And they said, and you know, right as I was leaving, there was one woman who grabbed me and she said, I wish they would have heard what you said. And I said, yeah, me too, and I left. And so I put that speech up on BuzzFeed.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I took it. The editor over there, Isaac Fitzgerald, they're really good about being really reactive and getting on top of things. And I said, this thing happened. I think there were some people in the room that really wanted to hear this. I know because I saw their faces. And the rest of the room that didn't hear it, and especially the people that didn't want to hear it, have to hear it.
Exactly.
So they put it up, and the crazy, it's gone very viral. And I find this really heartening, specifically because what I was saying in the speech is that people keep telling me in the course of my book that no one can care about us. No one can care about something that is the other, and you can't. No one's going to relate to it. Make yourself more relatable. But what I have found in going out with this book is the book isn't about Indian Americans. It's about losing someone you love. It's about family. It's about what families will do to stay loving each other in a really fraught moment, and that's the thing people connect to. So people come to me all the time, like, I know you talked about the Indians, but this is totally us, this is the Italians. Yeah. I know, you know,
absolutely.
I know you talked about this, but this is really the Jews, and that's the thing. Is I was saying in my speech, white Americans can care about so much more than your industry imagines. You have this industry that tells me that white Americans are not interested in me, and that is not true. I have not found that to be true. And also, your industry assumes that the audience doesn't look anything like me, and it does. This audience has changed so much. And so I want someone to acknowledge that these things are changing and to hear that there's a way to move forward, and it doesn't look like the way we've been moving forward so far.
So what do you mean? The representatives of the industry, they're the gatekeepers. Absolutely. They don't care. They don't. And they don't want to be left behind, and they don't want to be told they need to think, feel in a broader, more interesting way.
The thing that's so discouraging to me about that idea is that it underestimates what people can do.
It does, which the publishing industry does in many ways. Does it not?
Yes.
But yes, it does.
Yeah.
They will be replaced by other people who
hopefully the young publishing stars.
Exactly, who are reading you on BuzzFeed.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah. The story is shocking, and yet it's not surprising.
No, I know.
Do you know? But that shocking is just as bad and horrible. And also, you know, and all the people of color crowding around, and all of you feeling, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing is, I didn't want that to be the end of
the
the
final.
moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't want like going out with something that I mattered to end in this sort of psychic scar where I was like, that was so embarrassing, and I just didn't want to have that be the story. And so, but the other thing that proves to me is that when something like that goes viral and everybody says, oh my God, you said this thing I wanted to have said, that just shows me we are in the right place if we can harness that. We're actually capable of this.
And if we find the old word, alternative media. You found BuzzFeed.
Right.
You know, the publishers.
Right, the place to get out.
That was not, so you found someplace else.
Right. Right.
So I'm being told that we are sort of now going to open everything for questioning. I just want to say, since it's race, and I want to end with what Mira's son's last definition of himself was when they asked him, who are you then? And he said, I'm Jewish in winter and Indian in summer.
Yes.
I love it. When I heard that, it was such a sort of triumphant version of a furtive and ironic story my father had once told about a friend of his from his childhood in Mississippi, when he immigrated north, whom he ran into some years later. The man seemed to be passing for white, but he said, you know, Jeff for Jefferson, he said, you know, half the year I live as a white man with my white family, and the other half of the year, you know, I travel abroad. No, I'm sorry, he traveled abroad with his white family. The other half of the year, I live as a Negro with my Negro family. And I thought, oh, okay, he summers as a white man, and in the winter Part of me thinks my father invented it, but probably not. But this is such a wonderful comic reversal, of this social realist, strange social realist tale. I love it.
So we're going to throw it open for questions.
If there are any questions, I'll bring you the
right
microphone. Here you go. And put it fairly close to your mouth.
It's not. It's a comment. I'm a psychologist, and we were working in a Buddhist Japanese community.
Up a little higher.
We were called into this community in Denver to help them make sense out of an elder who they felt was crazy. And he kept rocking and rocking and rocking and rocking. And they would ask him, they would interview him with a formal psychological interview, and he would not respond, but he'd just keep rocking and rocking. So at some point, a young Japanese psychology student that I work with went in there and talked with him. So he started talking. So Lori came back out, and we asked Lori, well, what went down? Why is he doing these things? And Lori said, he told me he's being an American.
Thank you. I don't think that was a question. There you go.
Hi, thank you for today, all of you. Margo, Mira, thank you. My question is about genres in literature, and perhaps it's more for Mira, but also Margo. What do you think about the fact that, you are an American writer writing a novel, but your novel might appear in the immigrant literature genre, or some genre that you never intended it to be under? Could you maybe speak a little bit about how it's divided? Like, there isn't like a white writer genre, you know? Like,
That's true.
Anyway.
That's true. No, you know what, and that brings up actually the point that I was trying to make before, is that I think sometimes from the outside, from the marketing side, people would say, this is immigrant literature. But in the actual experience of it, it wasn't, by the way, my book was just in any bookstore you would find it in with the fiction, no special immigrant section. But the experience of reading it, I think for people was not to feel like it was immigrant literature. And most of the time when I do the thing that, so no one will admit they read their good readers review, but I do sometimes. And when I do that, like I would say that there's, there people say, that's an Indian story, and then they immediately go to what is relatable about it. So I know what you're saying in that, what does it feel like to be pigeonholed that way? But that has not been my experience with readers. It's been my experience with people trying to figure out how to talk about my book in the world. Does that make sense?
And with marketing, this is a perfect example of a move that began partly, as it was meant to be a sign of progress. This African American studies, Latina studies, and all these categories really emerged in the late '60s, '70s as the scholarship and the fiction, nonfiction in these fields were emerging and really being public and visible for the first time. Women's studies, then gay studies. Many of us who welcomed that at the time are now saying, as Richard Rodriguez, whose essays I very much admire, always says, look, put me in all of them. Just put me in all of them as long as they all exist. Until such time as these categories are no longer necessary. But at that time, Mira will not be having that experience at the Publishers Weekly luncheon.
Yes. Well, you know what? And actually, though, I was talking about this with Antonio Ruiz Camacho, who is here. Also, because the way we talk about culture and the way we talk about these things, it changes from generation to generation,
exactly.
Right? So what I am going with now, the fact that I am reading, I'm able to speak to readers, is directly descending from the fact that you guys went out and said, just get us anywhere.
Yeah,
get
exactly.
us anywhere.
And
talk
make
about
it visible.
Us and
make
us
it visible. That's right.
And then you have to look back on that and say, okay, so making us visible is not enough if we're still the other.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the fact that we're everybody, right?
Yeah, and making us visible if we're the other can actually become a form of constraint. Right. So, yeah, history must keep evolving, and marketers must
keep evolving.
Yes, made to evolve.
questions?
Yes.
Sorry.
We're about this far away, okay? That'll work.
So I got a question. Remember, you were like talking about that bar, like you and everybody at the back was like talking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when that woman came over to you and grabbed you and said, "I really wanted to," what was it? Really wanted like
Hear it?
Yeah, to hear it. Was that woman black or white?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. That's my son. We do actually have conversations, not on microphones as well. I know you're asking that question. That person was actually, she was brown. The person that said that to me, yeah, she was a brown person. And so Zakir, to answer your question, that's partially why I wanted to get the speech up, because a lot of the people that were looking at me with that sadness were brown, but there were also, I should tell you, there was also a ring of people that were not brown that were listening, and I could tell because I could see their faces and their frustration, and I put it up also for them. I put it up for everybody. Does that make sense? Okay.
All right, so you made sense, Jason.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how one manages the hunger to be seen and heard during the writing process. As one is sort of thinking about how one will be received or heard or not heard, both by the people who are not of your immediate community and the people who are, and that there are sort of different obstacles to navigate in thinking about how we do or do not cater to expectations of us. And in particular, not just in thinking about like the reader at large, where like publishers are telling us this is what people are open to, or this is what people will understand, but especially considering that so many writers now are coming through the MFA system, and I did myself, studied with Margo at Columbia.
Lucky you.
Also, what happens in communities of writers that affects how we negotiate our hunger to be seen or heard by other people who may or may not resemble us.
Whoa, that's a very complicated one. Words like, for example, hunger, and you used another word, it wasn't gauging, but it was something like that. Those are very difficult negotiations. I think what we all writers hunger to be heard, we do. And all writers struggle with that line between saying exactly what you want to say and exactly the way you want to say it, and recognizing at what moments that still has to be recalibrated because it's so, it might be just too inside you, the language. I mean, you're communicating with a range of other people. I think there are just, when you're a person of an other, there are often too many voices in your head that do have to do, that turn into self-censorship or a desire to please, but maybe you want to please two not particularly compatible constituencies. And all I can say is that you have to keep examining those and having a kind of almost finding ways to exorcise them, and move into that space where you're saying it the way you need to. Your craft and your instincts are really at work, and you can keep that. The other stuff will emerge later for you to think about. That it's finding that private space that every writer craves, where it's you, your imagination, and the life of language. But it's hard. There's much more to clear away for us. Yeah.
It's more nuanced. It becomes harder.
Yeah. Both cruder and more nuanced than the issues. Yeah.
We have just one more question. Just time for that, and this lady's back.
Hi. this has been amazing, and the woman in the green pineapple shirt asked a really great question too. I'm in an MFA program also, and I wanted to ask, I mean, this sort of professionalism and strategic and thinking about publishing, do you feel like it's become a way to kind of elide questions about racism and disparity? Because I feel like we're constantly asked to think about, who's your audience, who are you writing this for? But a lot of the time it seems like code for, don't scare anybody and don't make anybody feel guilty or mad about things. And it seems like it's very difficult to sort of get at the question separately.
Wait, what was the first bit? Do you feel that what was the first part of the question? Do you feel it's...
Sorry, whether professionalizing and sort of the way that MFA candidates are taught to be strategic about publishing is sort of a way to get them to internalize some of the feelings they might have about different disparities.
Yes, where people say this is a professional thing. Like this is you have to be a professional in this situation, and then you have to discount your own gut that's saying, no, I don't think this is a question that's asked of white authors, right? I think this is not a moment in which you're asking me a fair question, but that's spun back to you as you need to be professional, right? Yeah. So I have a lot to say about that, just because I also am. I was in corporate America for 20 years before I published this book. So I think that is a thing that happens not just in publishing, but in every work situation you will go into as a minority. People will often spin prejudice as professionalism.
Yeah. Codes.
Yeah.
Now codes.
And the thing that I find myself doing a lot in that situation is having to unpack it myself. And what I used to do in that situation was unpack it myself and know what was happening, so that if let's say a white friend would tell me, you're really lucky because affirmative action works for you, which I was told a lot. And if they said that, I would unpack that in my own mind and say, like, okay, this is this person and they're treating me this way, and I'm just gonna go around them. And now I am in a different point in my life. I'm a 42-year-old woman that has been working for an awfully long time to see these things happen. And so now the unpacking involves calling people out on it when it happens. So saying to that producer, the Boston producer, which I didn't put in the entire article, but saying to him, I don't think that these are not unusual things that I'm using. These are not unusual terms. If you're really uncomfortable, we can use it, but this is not crazy. And by the way, yeah, I'm sticking with the unfamiliar names because there are a lot of people that know them. And just kind of saying that so that I have a place to answer that. But again, like what we were talking before, it's an evolving conversation, and you have to kind of find your way through it. You have to know where you're willing to go.
I would also say that you find groups of people you can talk about this with. The women, there's an R word, multi-racial, ethnic organization at Columbia that evolved, because again they felt craft standards, all these and almost all white syllabi were not working. A few years ago, again, multi-racial ethnic group of women calling themselves WTF, ostensibly Women Talk Feminism, formed, and they really, they talk a lot about, again, codes of language. There are really ways of disparaging of a wide range of women's writing, how you fight back, even down to, all right, I need this job. I'm a young woman making her way. Help me with strategies because I can't call my boss out yet. These kinds of conversations and groups, however formal or informal, are really wonderful.